So now that I've had my walk through my forest, quite a hike. It's pretty nice, man. It's a beautiful day out here. John S. Thompson, the current student of Egyptology, has noted in his article, Lehi in Egypt, that the parallels between Israel and Egypt was scorned in Joseph Smith's day. He says this on page 259. He says, but a steady, gradual accumulation of archaeological and historical and linguistic studies, inscriptions, ostraka, etc., have been showing that Egypt and Israel played a closer role together than we understood only 100 years ago. Now, this argument that I've presented from my friend still shows that this argument is prevalent, but the latest information shows that there is a closer parallel between the Jews and the Egyptians than we thought of, basing our information only on the biblical record. The biblical record is far from complete. Archaeologically, he says more recent finds continue to alter or at least sharpen our views as to the conditions in and around Jerusalem during the latter half of the 7th century. This is Lehi's day, around 600 BC. So he summarizes the present current information as understood by the scholars. He says the Egyptian interactions in the land of Canaan shows that Egyptian political and cultural influence was at a high point. It was at a high point in Lehi's day. This is a pure bonus for the Book of Mormon, saying this on page 260. Lehi would have had the opportunities to learn Egyptian near his home in Jerusalem and to use it not only to read Egyptian, but to keep records and to teach his posterity. This is based on the archaeological evidence that we've discovered now that he shares, he as well as 3 or 4 other scholars in this particular work. As the prevalence of the Egyptian influence in and around Lehi's Jerusalem is made apparent, it becomes clear that the Book of Mormon has indicated all along what the scholars are increasingly coming to understand. Yes, the Book of Mormon is ahead of the game, in other words. It's a very telling point, isn't it? Egyptian political domination over the area of Canaan and Palestine in Lehi's Jerusalem area was at a high point in the 18th and 19th dynasties, the New Kingdom period of Egyptian history especially. This is when it began, was the 1539 to 1190 BC, and then it increased, then it waned, then it waxed, then it waned, then it waxed. It was again waxing during 600 BC. And then he discusses the Ramses the 11th in the 11th century BC, the 20th dynasty collapsed, the political structure of Egypt was divided, and so on and so forth. And what I want to do is touch the highlights of the area of 600 BC in Jerusalem about the Egyptian influence. Psammiticus, he's saying this on page 262 now, he says Psammiticus quickly gained independence from Assyria, which had turned its attention to internal conflict and to its eastern and southern neighbor nations, which were growing in power. Once he was free from Assyrian rule, the 26th dynasty pharaohs continued to play an active role in the politics of the Levant. It says on page 263, Psammiticus' son, Necho II, continued his father's political ambitions in the Levant, sending campaigns east of the Euphrates against the Chaldean armies. En route, Necho II defeated and killed King Josiah in 609 BC at Megiddo, and set up the Egyptian border near the Euphrates. After dealing with the Chaldeans, he returned to establish hegemony over Israel. And this is on page 263 that he says this. Necho II of Egypt placed Jehoiakim on the throne. Not only was the king of Judah installed by Pharaoh, but other officials seem to have been installed as well. Now, biblical scholar Ephraim Stern, basing his remarks principally upon more recent archaeological evidence, declares, through the years from Josiah to the coming of the Babylonians, Egyptian officials ruled both in Philistia and in Judah. This is the archaeological historical understanding that we have right now. Egypt ruled the area. The exiling of Jehoahaz, the subsequent appointment of Jehoiakim, and the seeming appointment of other officers in the land of Judah by Pharaoh himself, all of this suggests Egypt's very strong political presence in Israel in the decade prior to Lehi's departure from Jerusalem. This is crucial to understand. The big dog was Pharaoh in Egypt. Make no mistake about that. This dominance, however, did not last long because in 605 BC the Chaldeans defeated the Egyptians at Carchemish and pushed them back to their own land. So later, Psammiticus II, Necho II's successor, he arranged a revolt against the Babylonians with the aid of Zedekiah, who was then the king of Judah. But the Babylonians prevailed and eventually razed the cities of Judah and Palestine to the ground. They utterly destroyed Judah. As the above historical outline demonstrates, the alliances of Egypt with Israel during the late 25th and early 26th dynasties and the subsequent political desires of the 26th dynasty for imperial expansion, what this did is it caused Egypt's political influence in Israel to reach unprecedented heights. Such was the immediate contemporary political situation in which Lehi and his family existed. This strong political influence surrounded Lehi's day surely would have emphasized those Egyptian cultural features that were already embedded in Canaan during the New Kingdom Empire. And so it goes. Let me continue on page 264 with some further information for you. This is all historical background showing the actual situation as opposed to what we read into the Bible. Now the current archaeological, historical, linguistic, political, religious situation is really in favor of the Book of Mormon. Truly. Thompson also notes that Gregory D. Mumford, in examining the heretofore largely ignored archaeological picture of Egyptian artifacts in southwestern Asia from 1550 to 525 BC, has shown that Egyptian cultural influences in Syro-Palestine seem to peak 4 times in 19 time divisions. 1450 to 1400 BC, then again in 1250 to 1150 BC, then again in 925 to 850 BC, and finally from 750 to 600 BC. This is our time era that we're interested in, the 25th and 26th dynastic periods. In addition, Ephraim Stern himself has recently demonstrated that Egyptian material culture in Israel, specifically in Israel now, has, from the reign of Psammiticus I to that of Psammiticus II, that is 664 to 589 BC, the Egyptian influence was plentiful. It was attested to the close political interactions that Egypt had with Israel as Assyria dwindled in strength. So the more recent historical and archaeological studies demonstrate and emphasize even more that Egyptian political and cultural influence in Canaan was at one of its peaks in the immediate decades leading up to Lehi's time. And I want to read these footnotes. These footnotes are very interesting. Gregory D. Mumford, his doctoral dissertation, International Relations Between Egypt, Sinai, and Syria-Palestine during the Late Bronze Age to Early Persian Periods, 1550 to 525 BC. This is a spatial and temporal analysis of the distribution and proportion of Egyptianizing artifacts and pottery in Sinai and selected sites in Syria-Palestine. That was a 1998 PhD dissertation that Thompson has found. And Stern, in his book Archaeology, especially Chapter 8, The Egyptians in Palestine in the 7th century BC. But what's interesting here is he has Abraham Malamut, his study, The Twilight of Judah in the Egyptian-Babylonian Maelstrom. This is supplements to the Vetus Testamentum, Volume 28, 1975, pages 123 through 145. He says, he provides nice detail about the final years of the kingdom of Judah, including its political fluctuations as it changed loyalties 6 times between Egypt and Babylon between 609 and 587 BC. We can see Judah is really trying to figure out what is going on.